All right, welcome back. We missed last week, of course. We had a holiday. Eduardo was somewhere very nice. There were palm trees even. I was amazed. I was
Yeah,
impressed.
Go Club here
Yes,
in
and it looked
Curitiba. Very
nice.
nice.
Yeah. So glad to be back though. I have a ton of questions. The guys already know that because I sent them over this morning. And I was like, we're going to cover all of this in 30 minutes. And Nick said there's about 3 hours worth of topic there. I said, I run a tight ship, so I'll keep you guys on track maybe. But there is a ton to talk about this week for sure. Much of today's focus, I really feel like I'd like to be on just what's going on in Brazil when it comes to grain movement, when it comes to the safrinha crop, when it comes to all of these things that have traders' attention right now. And then, of course, we'll touch on what's going on around the world. What we're catching some headlines out of China. We've got a heat wave hitting the EU. And so that's kind of where we'll wrap up, just to give you guys an idea of what we'll touch on today. And so let's dive in. The 500-pound gorilla in the room, or maybe the 150 million metric ton gorilla in the room. We had AgroConsult come out this week, very well respected group come out and basically put out the mother of all safrinha crops. I saw the headline at first. I'm like, why is everyone acting like this is a big deal? Because I thought the 123 was their full crop estimate. Carl and I said the same thing. And then the next morning I reread it with fresh eyes and I was like, oh, so uh let's start there. Nick, you'd started this and we'll kind of I'll let you guys both tackle this, but Nick, you did today start with a bit more in the way of a statistical analysis of the likelihood that we will see a 150 million metric ton crop, or that they're accurate in that analysis. Let's start with the statistics of the matter, and then let's go to the anecdotal nature of the matter, which it would be Eduardo. What are your thoughts on that? So let's start there, Nick. Statistically speaking, and all of that good stuff. What does the data show when it comes to crop size?
Okay, so yeah, it's the right question, and I think the framework you got to understand is traditional ag and the meteorologists today who are going to sort of defend their work. They're going to tell you that this is how much it rained, the pattern, but most of them aren't working with the data. So you kind of have three levels. You have the data of what you think based on things you remember and maybe a basic trend yield model. I got a question online about the Jewison model, which it'll have shortcomings for this. Then you have the second level where you actually take the data and you properly model all of it and you look at specific to states and you dig into regressions. And one of the things, like we pointed out, is this kind of polynomial concept, what it shows in recent years. And then the thing we highlight is the shortcomings of models. So models have to be built on data they're trained on. So if we don't think something is likely, or something hasn't happened in recent history or all of history, and we don't weight it accordingly, and you can change distributions of models, you can, but what's going to happen is, I've got several emails this morning, is the meteorologists aren't going to inherently understand that, nor are they going to do that, because they're generally using things that are applied globally. And then they'll say, well, obviously Brazil's different, and that's not really the answer, because we've seen corn industries mature in many other places. Ukraine behaves a bit like Brazil. So at the end of the day, where the shortcomings are is, like, there's still the human, and the human is, hey, this looks way better. This year, farmers had better resources. The weather hit at the perfect time. The winds we hear about in Russia, the humidity. So the shortcomings of models are they don't capture extreme events well, and extreme events can happen in different ways. And some of those are just something we haven't seen before. Or the more common event, which I think this year in particular is, again, we started with anchoring bias that was very low relative to potential. When we look at, if we remove unlikely scenarios, we would have started this year with between about a 6-1 yield. So you're still one standard deviation over that, but well within, especially considering 7 out of the last 9 years in Mato Grosso in particular, but Brazil had been very poor for rain. So if you kind of boil it down, you have a 1 out of 10 event, and the best year with rain in 10 years. So statistically, it's not out of line. And but our models aren't built to capture that, and we're not, we're not on the ground in Brazil. So once we start hearing that people are saying this could be that big, we dive into the numbers and we pay close attention. But most of the people who are gonna dispute it, they're not gonna look at the data one, and then they're not gonna have the insights on the ground. So I leave it to, Eduardo to tell us if it's, if it's going to likely, is it going to feel like a 150 if it hits it at the end of the day? Is it going to, we'll look into, is it going to trade like one? And ultimately, probably a lot of this will be more of a knockdown effect, like Q4 US exports. And, ultimately, domestic cash play, it's probably going to have a lot less for the futures market. Brazilian margins should be fabulous. Like, a lot of this probably won't play out in the way that Americans would expect, Chicago to just, now granted it's puking at the moment, but anyway, so that's what I would say. It's kind of, if you look at the three, you have the meteorologist who looks at a weather and guesses. Then you have the actual modeling, and then you understand your shortcoming of the models, and the human has to step in and say, this is different.
So having said that, Eduardo, opinion on that number? I know,
Yeah, the point is Mato Grosso. Yeah,
yes.
where
Yes.
Agriconsult pull up the very high, the average. The average is very high, and the point is their track mainly it's through the 163 highway, and there is very good, very mature areas. The soil is good, and so on. So, and the harvest is not that fast, as we know. So it's very, I think it's too premature to affirm the average in Mato Grosso is more than 130 bags per hectare. So it's too big. And standard deviation is too big in terms of the average guess. For example, traders, they are not guessing that too much. They are using, for example, the whole crop, summer and safrinha, more like 145. The 145 is the highest one. It's between 140 145. So I think they should wait one month more to have something more consistent. And we have the other areas around 163, which is not, they are not good, and like that region. To compare to US farmers, it's like comparing to North Dakota and Illinois and Iowa. So it's completely different. So we have to wait, but of course, safrinha is very big, and the bases in interior, they are not confirmed that crop size yet. Of course, the harvest is not as fast as could be or expected, and we have some short squeeze in the logistics, like soybean. It's not so serious, but it depends on the weather and the night temperatures. The humidity of the grain is not dropping as fast as farmers they want. So farmers at this level of price, they will wait to naturally lose the wet, and then the harvest will be very, very slow. Because of that, then we can see Brazil getting more expensive for July. We didn't have more logistics, but for August, for example, Brazil could get more expensive and give to the US a chance to ship more or to sell, for example, to Asia. Like this week, we had a South Korea company bought two cargos, two tenders, and probably it's going to come from the US. Then that's the story. We don't know. We have to wait. And Mato Grosso, the Agriconsult pull up too high. But the point is their track was in a the best area. We should wait.
So real quick, that makes a lot of sense. If I looked at, one of the things we went through is that you have to really divide. Brazil's older data history isn't very good. So if you actually looked at this year's Mato Grosso in particular, you're about 14% above, kind of long-term anomalies, but in reality, that's probably more of a 30%. Your best year, you were about a 17% deviation, when you were 40% better. That would point in line with kind of a 13%, yield deviation. So if you threw that into the Agriconsult's number, that would be a 118, 117, 118 safrinha, which, and again, I think their full crop is quite a bit bigger. So it puts you at a 143, 144. And I mean, again, like I think very justifiable and probably far more realistic when Eduardo explains it.
So let's talk about.
I think the sample was not good. The ideal sample.
Perfect. That's why we need the experts.
That's why we that's why we ask these questions. So let's talk about the grain flow. Because I one of the things that I've been saying for a while, and I think is something that is going to potentially become I feel like it's already become noticeable to a certain extent, but just because it shows up on a balance sheet doesn't mean it's available in the pipeline, has kind of been the conversation that we've had. And so obviously we do have this slower harvest pace. We have poor margins for exporters. Currently, you're seeing this short squeeze that you're discussing. What does this look like as we move ahead, in your opinion? Does the farmer capitulate, or does the slow harvest pace, one of the things I would say is like a lot of folks right now are waiting for the Brazilian farmer to have to puke supplies. But the longer harvest is drug out, the less aggressive that puke becomes to a certain extent. Like obviously they're going to have to sell it or some of these things, but it's not as forced from a space or logistics or whatever. But what is your opinion on grain movement here as we move into August, and what does that mean for the overall global supply picture, in your opinion?
Yeah, Andy. The right point is that exporter, they are not making money. Farmers, they are not happy with flat price. Of course, they produce more, but the flat price is very low because of the FX, because of the dollar overall. So, but the point is this: exporters, they will prefer to keep shipping soybean, because in the soybean they make money because the carry is very high. Each month 30 cents. So if you carry, and then the cost in Brazil is about 15, 16 cents per bushel per month. So they can make money originating beans. And corn, it's not, because the curve is very flat. I don't know. The risk is, the point is this, that the risk is farmers, they will hold for sure. But in January, and then we have a big soybean crop again, and then we have no space for that. Then what you're going to do? We need to ship, and then that's the big point. In January or Feb, Brazil could smash the corn market, if farmers keep holding the corn and delaying the export program, because it's too slow. It's lower than the last year. And the last year, July, for example, was very small compared to 23. Then the risk is this for the US also. In Jan and Feb, maybe Brazil will, the prices here is going to be very low. So we have to pay attention to the speed of the program, which is very slow now. And the exporters, they are not making money.
It'll be interesting to see what happens if the Brazilian farmer continues to hold, and we see, because the demand has to be filled somehow. So either it's going to be filled, like either Brazil's going to step in August through December and ship their 40 million metric tons, or however million. I mean, I was going to ask you also what your projection was for
45 million minimum. 45.
Okay, so in the USDA is at 43, so we're a little, I mean, it's one of those things I like to kind of point out too, is it's even with the increase in production size, but we are talking about a large book that needs to go. It's either gonna have to go now, basically, or in its traditional window, which is August through December,
Yep.
because
Yep.
the US typically doesn't export corn, October through December at the very least. Or you're going to see Brazil basically eat our lunch to a certain extent when it comes to new crop soybean sales, and
Yep.
you're going to see a long tail of US corn sales that, but then you get into Q1 of 26, and suddenly maybe we, instead of hitting our peak when you would usually see the U. So basically, it would be a
Yes.
mess. Long story short, it would be
Yeah,
something
mess. Yeah, that's the point. That is the point.
but it's going to be a mess in the short term from a lack of supply that everyone's anticipating, and then basically you would have the effect happen later on, almost to a certain
And
extent, if that's the way it works. I mean, to me, that's what I'm paying attention to more than anything is how quickly the Brazilian export program develops and whether or not you see exporters get to where they have positive margin again. But I think that relies on the Brazilian farmer selling at this point.
yeah, the FX could play an important role. That should be the point. If, for example, dollar here in Brazil jump, and then okay, farmers will be happy to sell their corn, and then we get some speed. But now it's very, very wide in terms of where the export parity can pay and the offers. It's around the 30 up to 50 cents per bushel, which is huge difference.
Yeah, that's what I talked this morning a little bit about what I'm calling a cash grain standoff. And I feel like we're seeing the same thing in wheat where, your bid offers just continue to sit very wide.
Yeah.
And it is just a question of who gives up first. Like obviously the end user to a certain extent can go only for so long, as is the case for the farmer. And so that's my question for you with the Brazilian farmer sentiment, the economic position of the Brazilian farmer, like what is that? When we talk about could the farmer hold, are they able to? Are they strong enough financially that they could keep the grain from moving into the pipeline, or do you think that they're going to be forced eventually to have to do something?
August is another month very important in Brazil to pay bills and loans and so on. I would say they will prefer to sell beans, and beans, the flat price in Brazil is pretty good, so no problem, and margin is good, and exporting can make money. China happy to buy, keep buying. So the liquidity of soybean market is good. I think so. They will sell more beans and hold corn forever. Forever, no, up to the end of the year. In the end of the year, they will force to sell something. Cooperatives, for example, in here in Paraná, they are very strong and they carry the positions very long. But it's unsustainable because we have wheat, we have soybean, and then we have a very big crop the next year. They will need to liquidate.
It's just a matter of when, right? That's
Yeah,
it's
that's
the
fine.
$1 million question at this point. Last question, kind of, and then I'll open it up, let Carl and Nick maybe get a word in edgewise. But just I wanted to touch on the high humidity, the high moisture levels in the corn crop. We did see that freeze, and I want to touch on how widespread that was too. But we did see that freeze event in southern Brazil. How mature was the corn? I mean, we know it didn't hurt yield. The corn was basically working towards maturity, but where would you say the average moisture level is, or what is the humidity level of the
25.
corn? It's
25.
25?
Yeah,
Okay, so
which
you're
is
really okay at
yeah,
25.
and it's not dropping. That's the point.
Oh, that's the problem though. Yeah. Do you think it will from here? Like, what is the idea weather-wise, Nick? Are we going to see weather improve to where it's going to help
It's
aid?
too. It's the nights are too cold. So
Yeah.
during the day, corn lose something, and then during the night, and it has been a night wet nights. So during the night, they got some moisture, and then this year has been very different in terms of speed of everything for the soybean and now for corn. Very different, and the
Yeah,
logistics are suffering, and tradings they have to deal with, and short squeeze. We have seen some.
No, and I was just going to add too, like that storm that came through when, pushed this last system up into Brazil. I mean, it's been raining in Brazil, but I mean, it was, Buenos Aires coldest in almost 2 decades. I mean, we had about 40 hours of just ripping winds here. It was quite, we had one storm. If you actually remember, it was the drought kind of breaker in December of 23 that went across Argentina. That was the only other kind of severe storm I kind of remember at that level. But the weather's been, pretty rough. So, I mean, and listen, Brazil's had, there are areas in the north planted 2 weeks late, with how wet parts, January into February was. You had some dry pockets in March. It's hard to think you have a 150 out there because you have had some of these weather challenges. I don't know how perfect it was, but it's definitely, and there's going to be areas that don't finish well now.
How is Brazil set up from an infrastructure standpoint when it comes to drying corn? Like, is it a typical, do you usually have to dry the bulk of the corn crop? Like, you're used to that, or is that
Very long lines, very long lines. That's one reason for farmers waiting in very slow harvest. That's the point. So lines are very long, and then the cost to dry the corn is very expensive. So because the wood in Brazil, we have no gas. For example, up north of Brazil, natural gas.
Yeah.
So it's wood. And wood is very expensive because the
interesting
ethanol
to me,
plants, they use all the wood that you could imagine. We have two bottlenecks, just to mention, in Brazil to keep increasing the ethanol plants, corn ethanol plants. One is wood, and another is credit. So they need more forests to burn, and so it's not cheap to dry corn or soybean.
Especially, I mean, 10% of moisture out of a crop that's been frozen too, like that doesn't want to dry down is not an easy feat. Like, it's not a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about the fact that you're without gas. Like, that didn't even cross my mind. So,
well, Argentina's has some to sell to you now, so.
that is true. Argentina is going to. Now, weather-wise, Nick, do we see an improvement in Brazil's weather? Do we see a warm up or a dry stretch or anything like that that'll help?
It's kind of still cold, and you still got kind of rain in the south, and it's moving a bit north in Paraná, so you're going to have the same problems here for a little bit.
How long could harvest stretch? Could you leave corn out in the field into December?
The quality is
It would hurt it, yeah.
Yeah, sure. That's the other point. So farmers, they want to blend the good one and bad one corn to
You're gonna wait for it
avoid
to dry
discounts.
down.
Yeah. Sure.
Huh. This is gonna be fun to watch.
But-
I mean, maybe not
but
fun.
I-
Maybe fun's
So
not
it's
the
a-
right word,
It's
but
a short-term opportunity for the West. Keep selling corn.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, it's in general a fairly good opportunity probably across South America for feeders. I mean, your
Mhm.
feed guys are in good shape, your ethanol. So on the demand side too, it's going to keep, one of the things globally that's kind of interesting is just the margins on most end user businesses are pretty good. Like,
Yeah.
things are generally good everywhere. And,
It
it's just
wasn't
an
the case in
interesting,
20, it didn't feel like. Like in 20,
No,
everyone was
it
kind of
was-
losing money. You know what I mean? Like a lot of
it was
people
a
have kind of
pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
soy meal is for free. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what,
Pay the freight, and then you take this out.
right?
exactly.
Take it off my hands. I'll give you
Yeah,
$5 a ton.
And 4 weeks ago, we would have said the Argentine farmer, would have heavily favored corn to beans, and now corn's made sure that's not really the case, and so like I do think the currencies are a far bigger deal. We keep, that's one of our
Mhm.
main themes, and again, like we write about inflation, like the inflationary ramifications, because it is like a policy of this government. And, therefore it's that this dollar is going to get weaker. And, in the weak dollar environments, that led to bullish commodity environments structurally because of investment in these things. Like that's not today's world. And yet, having said that, the price of inputs, the end user demand, the prices that consumers are paying are all rising. So you have a naturally higher priced environment, but you don't have that speculative fervor that you normally associate with like weak dollar bull markets. So it's an interesting dynamic, to look at. But I think you have to kind of say that people are going to get overly bearish here.
It'll be hard to, I feel like, but what do I know?
Yeah,
Moving our attention to the Northern Hemisphere in the spirit of keeping this thing rolling on. I told you guys I would meet our deadline on time. I won't though, but turning our attention to the Northern Hemisphere weather. Nick, let's start with China. We talked about it a bit on the PIQ show this morning to start. And I know you were listening in, so I could just imagine you were probably just chomping at the bit, maybe to say something. But we are seeing video of flooding in portions of I think it's southwest China. But there is
yeah.
conversation about heat and dryness across the northern plain. Is it anything that we really should be paying attention to, or are these kind of pockets of areas that aren't big agricultural hotspots?
Yeah, so I mean, they're just not going to be big areas for what we follow and tend to. Like honestly, the West, Xinjiang has been the biggest issue with the heat, which is cotton. 97, 8% of their cotton's there. I actually just pulled up, so like Guizhou, where those floods have kind of made all the headlines. Somebody sent me a thing, they got 284 millimeters the last 4 weeks. So, but keep in mind, they got 300 last year.
Mhm.
So as bad as it is, like last year was worse. And and that's you've had 5 years, where you've been over, call it 11 and a half inches, so every 8 years you get one of these, but we've had them back to back now. So but it's just not a big grain area. The bigger thing is that you do have a little bit of heat now, again, in the Northeast, but you got rains coming through 70, 80% of it that weren't there 5 days ago. So as long as they keep getting every 10 days, enough rain, and it doesn't set up, I don't think there's a big problem in it. And I think it really just goes back to, even if there are these marginal issues, you're not going to feel it. They don't need to buy, they got stocks to rotate. It's just not, it's not
On
a
the
market
subject
event.
of, yeah, China to me, what's more important than anything right now, not saying that weather isn't important, obviously I'm watching it,
Mhm.
but there isn't anything that's caught my eye there necessarily, that's
Mhm.
super negative. I want to see their auction results. There's rumors that they're going to auction 4 million metric ton of corn and 8 million metric tons of rough rice. To me, if we get 100% clearance at, certain levels, then that's going to be a different story. Though I'm not holding my breath. I'm ready to be disappointed by China domestic demand. I don't know why, but Eduardo, are you gonna throw anything in on that?
It's dead forever. It's in.
You
Well,
sound like me in 20. I always have to be careful because in 2020 I was adamant that China was never gonna step in, and
Oh
I
yes,
just,
yes.
oh golly.
we're We're and one thing too, you're going to see, right? You're going to see the same thing you saw in beans, and then
Yep.
you're going to get the journalists, record corn August Brazil program. Like Brazil's logistics are getting so big and efficient that even, when the barges wait, they start unloading, you can load 3, 4 more vessels a week. You're going to get this super disappointing July, and then this massive August, and they're going to tell you it's all a record, and it's just going to be average up 3% year on year over,
Just as
a
expected.
quarter. Yeah.
What else? European Union, Europe, did we get rains this week? There was a lot of talk that there were thunderstorms in the forecast for France and
Yeah.
Germany, and I think Poland had some. Did we get the rain that we needed, or, what are we looking at ahead of next week's big temperature spike?
Yeah, I mean, we got some, but it's definitely not out of the woods. And this forecast has been pretty erratic. I mean, like the whole 14, everything outside of like the next 5 days. So I would say, with pollination, what, 2 to 4 weeks out, kind of in most places. maybe a little longer. Like, you've got like Romania is a big one to watch. They've got huge yield assumptions, like too
Mhm.
high. And,
Mhm.
they're going to be kind of normal wet in the east of the country, and they could be piping hot in the west.
Mhm.
So, southern Ukraine, same exact situation, except they don't have all the heat. So they've got this heat set up over Hungary and then just massive heat over France. So I think we're going to come in on Monday and probably need to take a much closer look because we'll be triple digits, probably over half of the corn area in the beginning of July. So
It's
it's definitely more worrying than the weather forecast we had, but probably the same as kind of, seasonal warming as a week ago. So it's just very erratic at the moment.
definitely something to watch. Any areas of the US that are concerning weather-wise? I think I know the answer. Or I should say North America
The
instead of the US.
Yeah, I was
That's
gonna say like
very,
Sinaloa got almost 2 inches over the last 4 weeks, so Mexico's quietly
yeah.
getting into better shape. Um, Saskatchewan's the one Central Prairies I would keep an eye on. They'll get dry again a bit here, and they got enough to sort of get to the next system, but they'll need it. North Dakota is gonna get a little dry here again, but there's no threatening temps, and I mean, everyone I spoke with keeps telling me everything is getting planted. So, um, yeah, I think pretty good.
We'll see what Monday brings, right?
Mhm.
All right. Having done all of we've basically burnt right through those questions I told you we would. Let's do our final thoughts. I'm gonna start with Eduardo this time. I'm gonna put you on the spot, Eduardo, but um what would you like to leave the audience with this week? Things that you're watching, something that you think we should be paying attention to, maybe that we aren't. What's on your mind?
Soybean meal.
Hmm.
Then you have the rumor, and the calculation was good last week. GG export to China, soybean meal to China. So it's very different, unexpected, because of the not because of the only because of the tax differential, because soybean is 3% and then soybean meal is 5%. But because of the whole thing, China always trying to add value to soybean in the domestic market, for sure. The crushing capacity is very huge, and it's very idle forever. So the point is how many the if this vessel is good in terms of execution, quality, and everything else. And then I heard a rumor, not just one cargo, but four. Then could create a new line of business, and every time then we have this differential between the soybean meal FOB Argentina and the soybean meal in the interior of China, including costas, everything else. And then so we have to pay attention to this arbitrage, and then that could create some different driver to the market. And for sure it's not good for CBOT, because at the end of the year, for sure they will face a lack of soybean from Brazil, and the soybean meal will jump. Then the soybean meal from Argentina could be channeled to constantly flow to China. So the question is, how large could be that program? 1 million, 2 million per month per year, or more. That's the point. So pay attention to the execution of those cargoes. If those are good, then the door is open.
I didn't even think about that. I'm kind of embarrassed right now on myself of that China buying meal is a thing that is
Yeah.
an important
This
shift.
group could change the name for bearish drivers. Man, I need something bullish.
Right?
That's
I
what,
That's
don't
it.
have any.
I hadn't even thought about it, but we had talked about that before. I'm trying to remember where the conversation was held, where, when it comes down to it, if meal gets cheap enough, China imports the meal, and then what does that mean? Like, do you see, the world really kind of focus on domestic demand and become sellers of byproduct, which makes no sense for China crush, but then does China look at, crushing domestic beans and exporting their own? I mean, the thing is, like, what I love most about this is that we've all been doing it for 20 plus years, you know, and we've seen some pretty massive changes over that time. Like,
Yeah.
can you
Yeah.
imagine how different this is going to look in 10 years from an overall standpoint? And like, we have this fundamental idea of what meal is and meal should do and meal this, that, and the other thing, but really it's not, it's no longer the important thing that you're getting out of the bean, you know, anymore. Like it's the oil
Yeah.
is. So that's a whole different focus. But anyway, I'm it's not my turn to jump on my soapbox. So Carl, I feel bad because you've spent the last half hour. So it's your turn. What are you watching? What do you think we should be paying attention to this week?
Um, collapse in the US dollar and record value in the Brazilian real. I think that's going to come to I think we're going to start watching that a little bit. Eduardo can weigh in, but I do think that's a factor. Watching in July, Argentine export taxes are expected to change. You're going to see what that does to the market over the next 2-3 weeks here in demand. And weather-wise, talked to an old contact of mine, a merchandiser. I've been talking to quite a few, but one out in north central, northwestern Iowa yesterday. The day after getting 3 inches of rain, they were able to go out and cut hay in their waterways. No humidity in Iowa at all. Temperatures in the 90s, and they said it was actually cool. That tells me after spending several years out there, there is not a lot of soil moisture in Iowa right now. And that backs up a lot of farmers saying that these rains are keeping the crop going, but they're not building their soil moisture. And I would watch the weekly drought map, basically from I-80 up just past the Wisconsin border. There is a swath up there that is starting to turn abnormally dry. I'm not saying it's a major drought right now, but if you start seeing pressure in that northern Illinois crop, and the southern Illinois crop is very poor right now. There's a lot of problems in southern Illinois. Even if we don't see crop loss up there, I think the pressure from that could, the way this market is formed up, that might be the catalyst that we need to watch for prices to take off.
Excellent. Nick, your thoughts, and then we'll call it a week.
Yeah, I mean, so I think Argentina is kind of interesting. We didn't touch much on it. I mean, farmers are engaged. They're going to have a record sun program. I think you're seeing, people turning on assets for the first time. Even they're getting through this kind of shock of higher cost of capital, higher, energy prices, things moving to market values. So, Argentina is still six months away from really kind of ramping up, but the efficiencies they're getting in position, like and they're, you're seeing their growth, and albeit from a very low base. I think 5.8% last month, and inflation's under 2%, 40% annually. So you're basically kind of there where you continue this for 3 more months, and you're going to start building confidence to make investments, start to fill these gaps, especially coming from the private sector. So keep an eye on Argentina. It's not there yet, but it's getting closer, and you can see it like in sunflower, where they've got a margin and they're turning things on. And then I think you'll see a divergence here. Seasonally, you might get 10 days into July, and again, a lot of it's still very weather driven. But the tendency will be for the traditional ag advisor and the ag social media community to get overly bearish. And I think you'll see that speculator who looks at things objectively and value and stuff is going to start to say this is getting too cheap. So and then you'll have a bunch of people saying, well, we can't understand why they're buying it, and so, keep an eye on that here when we get through the holiday. We talked about how you pulled the seasonality forward into kind of, you probably without Iran make your highs in May instead of late June. And you could very easily do that on the downside, especially like with South America kind of putting some pressure on early and being done.
Yeah, I think that's kind of my point at this point is I think the idea that globally cash prices have really reached significant support. Like you're looking at cash wheat, out of the EU and Black Sea, rumored to trade at last harvest's lows. You're looking at corn around the world trading at, levels that triggered significant buying, a year ago. And so the thing that I keep seeing or hearing is that the end user is waiting for it to get cheaper because they're waiting for the farmer to capitulate. I would be careful expecting the farmer to shove this. I mean, especially to me, the delay, the slower pace to Brazilian harvest is going to really put off what would have been a puke that you would have seen or traditionally would expect to see. And you see a similar sort of delay in wheat harvest in any way, which you're not going to in the EU. Obviously, they're dry. They're going to be able to probably roll through it. But, you see a continuation of hiccups with logistics and the ability to push high quality grain, the quality that you're looking for, because you also have quality pockets and things like that. I feel like there's a complacency amongst the world end user right now that could become spicy. And so I think that could play in line with what Nick's talking about, where it seems like as soon as we get our most bearish, I'm waiting for someone to publicly say a 185 corn yield as it's a lock. And then I will say, okay, we've hit peak bearish and we should turn around. But obviously we have to see what Monday's numbers bring us, and that'll set the stage for the rest of the month. But I do feel like, this conversation about a lack of demand isn't because the world end user doesn't want to buy it. I think the world end user just thinks they're going to be able to buy it for cheaper, and I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. So one of these days, you might have someone realize pretty soon that, oh shit, I excuse my language, but I waited a little too long and now I can't get what I need as quickly as I need it. So
and real quick with that, like I think, again, you like US FDI in Q2 collapsed. Like, the world is not making investments, the world is waiting, Trump's policies are having an impact. But the other thing I think is Argentina is like the perfect place to watch. You've kind of got the recipe where people want to be optimistic and they want to invest, but you keep prices here or lower and they're not going to plant that marginal acre. They're not going to take on that risk. They're not going to go get an official bank loan for the first time in 20 years to make a short-term investment. So there is this, seed companies are still looking to exit when the liquidity opens, not expand for the time being, the bigger ones. So you do have this thing where at $4.50 to $5 corn, and then a real that's been firm. Argentina you could probably start to argue output across the board can start to move higher, with people being optimistic about the economy. You're down here or lower. There's no way they take on that risk.
I think that's an important point, super important. So,
Yeah.
anyone have anything they want to add before we call it a week and let you, Eduardo's reached vest season. So when it's vest season in Brazil, that's what, you're.
I'll be shit if I don't. I'm going to say something bearish. So
Right, that's what you can't say. You can't throw a rock anymore without a bearish point.
Nobody's gonna watch us.
That's why, that's why it's depressing. It's depression hours. So, all right. With that, you guys, we will be back next week. Wait, nope, not next week. It's a holiday. I'm taking an extended sort of break. I mean, I guess if we need to, if something big happens, we'll talk about it. But with it being the 4th here, I don't know if there'll be much of anything really exciting to talk about next Thursday by any means. So we'll play it a little bit more by ear this
yes,
round.
4th of July. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. With that, we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll be back. Have a good one.
Okay. All right. See you guys. Bye-bye.
See you. Thanks.